Been reading lots of books. Dark bleatings, everybody. Let's do something bookish, shall we? I'm not going to talk about Alien Romulus again. Not in this video anyway. So, I have started the year with a read what you own challenge, and I got this idea from Criminoli, who's done a few of these, and I'm going to link his channel below because I love Criminoli, and if you're not watching Criminoli and you like bookish content, then I'm surprised you haven't come across him. So I'll link him in the description. But I have hundreds and hundreds of unread books in my house, and it's just getting a bit ridiculous. So I thought I'll do a read what you own challenge. I'm going to do 100 books before I buy any other books. The only exceptions for anything new coming in are my Abominable Book Club box, which I'm not cancelling, but I'm just going to make it so that anything I get like that comes from an outside source that's not me ordering it, I can't read until I've cleared this list first. And I wrote a list of 100 books that I want to read as well, so there's specific books that include all of my review requests that I've got on ebook, and then paperbacks that I got at FantasyCon, and just some other things on my personal TBR. So I am reopening review requests in February, so in about a week, but I will not be able to get to any requests that come in until I've cleared this pile, and then I'm probably going to start a second read what you own immediately after. Maybe I'll go in a little shop first to treat myself to some books for reading all of my books. So we have got 18 books so far that I've read this year. Now, if you're looking at the date and thinking, how on earth has she read 18 books this year already and it's only the 23rd? I started probably, I'd say 6 or 7 of these at some point in December, but the reason I put them onto this year instead of last year's reading list is because I finished them in January. So they were mostly anthologies that I was sort of dipping in and out of, reading the odd story here and there, but I like to do my best of the year list in December, and I uploaded a video every week, so like best short story collections, best novels, etc. And so I automatically sort of disqualified anything I was reading in December and bumped it to January so that I can put it in this year's best of list, so that like I'm not just leaving out books that I'd partially read, if that makes any sense. So yes, I have been reading a lot recently though. So first up, we've got a novel called The Dead Children's Playground by James Cain, and this is available on Kindle Unlimited if you want to check it out if you're not sure about buying it. So this, oh god, this is a great novel. This was about a late teen, not a late teen, an older teen. What's the word for a teenager that's nearly like a young adult? A young adult, let's say, who has a little sister, and they move to a new town, and there's been a lot of stuff going on with the family. The little sister has recovered from very serious illness, but obviously there was a big financial hit to the family, hence the move, and lots of medical care. And then the older sister is feeling quite like neglected by her parents, and particularly by her mother, because of course her little sister's illness kind of like overshadowed anything that was going on with her. And so we've got really interesting family dynamics going on, and she really loves her sister and feels conflicted about, you know, feeling resentful of not having enough of her parents' attention and things. So I thought that it was a really good exploration character-wise of those kind of dynamics. But then we also have the horror element, the supernatural horror element. So the place that they've moved, there is a sort of local legend about this place. They've moved right basically on top of the site of something horrible that happened in the sort of local town history, and then stuff starts to go awry. I thought that this was a really well written book, and I thought the characters were really engaging. I wouldn't say it's a YA novel, even though the protagonists are sort of YA protagonists, because they're quite serious themes, and you know, it doesn't shy away from certain horrible things later on in terms of the violence. I think that this would be fun for fans of supernatural horror just in general, especially if you like sort of ghosty kind of things. I will say that I originally really thought I'd predicted this book. I had this idea about where it was going to go. I thought something is introduced about a character and I thought, oh well, that's really obvious what that's going to be, and I was very pleasantly surprised to be wrong about everything that I so arrogantly had predicted. I was sure I was right. So that was just really fun for me. So I would recommend this book to horror fans. So next we have an anthology called We'll Always Have Alchemy from Alchemy Press, and it's edited by Peter Colborne, sorry. And it was the 25th anniversary of Alchemy Press, so this book was like brought out to celebrate that. So this is a mix of horror, sci-fi and fantasy stories. Some of the authors include Mike Chin, Joe Fletcher and Jan Edwards. I love Jan. And this is also available on KU. This anthology was sort of a mixed bag for me. So there were stories in there that I really, really loved, and then a couple that I wasn't very interested in at all. But like I say, it's a mix of horror, sci-fi and fantasy. And I basically exclusively read horror. And I do read genre blends, but there are things that I'm not very interested in. So sci-fi, even though my favourite film is Alien, and that is sci-fi horror, I'm just not a huge fan of it in general though. So I tend to not enjoy sci-fi horror stories as much as just regular horror stories. And I'm not a fantasy reader. I've dipped my toes in. I've read a couple of fantasy series, but generally fantasy doesn't hit the mark for me either. But I think that what I really liked about the anthology overall is that the order of the stories, it was really varied, and the fantasy stories were not what I was expecting for fantasy. So, and I'm not a seasoned fantasy reader, so I thought it was a really good mix. If you're somebody who likes multiple genres and you like sort of a hard departure every now and then in a book, in an anthology, I think this would be a book for you. It was like this was an enjoyable anthology for me, not one of my favorites, but again, kind of a mixed bag. Loved the horror stories, just not so much with the other genres, but that's not really the fault of the authors, that's me and my preferences. Number 3 is another anthology called Laid to Unrest from Red Cape Publishing, and it was edited by PJ Blakey Novice, sorry about my pronunciation, also available on KU. Now, this one was very interesting because it was so all of the stories are like their own separate stories, but the anthology was tied together by the concept that almost all of the stories started at the funeral of one central character, or if not at the funeral, someone in the story or something to do with the story was something to do with this guy that has died, whose funeral it is. And I thought that for an anthology theme and a concept, that is extremely ambitious, because you can't, like, unless you want to spend literally years waiting for stories to come back in and reading them, send things out, you're not going to have a case where the first author writes the first story, you send it to the next author, then they write their story, and then the next author has to read the 2 stories. Like, that's just not real. I mean, this could be how this was put together. I highly doubt it. What's more realistic is that all of the authors were briefed on what the central theme was, and then they just wrote their stories, sent them in, and then the editor would have worked to make sure everything was a bit seamless, so maybe provided edits and stuff. So I really, really liked the theme, and my favourite thing about the anthology was that it could have just stuck to one type of horror or one genre. So like the editor could have said, right, the central thing is this guy's funeral and no supernatural horror. We want all just real world horror, or we want all crime stories or something. But it's a horror anthology that has a range of subgenres: supernatural, real world, etc. Some are a little bit humorous, some are just straight up horror, and I just thought that it was impressive that there was so much variation, and the world felt really, really big because this included supernatural and not supernatural horror. The only thing that I think let it down a little bit was that almost all of the stories started at this funeral, but then a couple didn't, and I was a bit unsure about why that decision was made, because I think they were like 4 or 5 in a row that all started at the funeral, and then one of them didn't start at the funeral, and it was jarring. It kind of took me out of the book, because by that point I thought that we'd sort of set the standard, and then it kind of went off book, and I guess I didn't like that because I didn't understand why it had happened. So if half the stories started at the funeral and then half didn't, that would have been okay if they'd been mixed up order-wise, but because it was only, I think it was only 2 that didn't start at the funeral, I was just confused about the decision for that. But generally it was an entertaining anthology. I enjoyed most of the stories. Some of the authors include one of my favourites, Annie Knox, Charlie Hall and Tony Sands, and amongst lots of others. And yeah, I thought it was overall pretty good. I would recommend it if you enjoy anthologies, and you especially like themed anthologies. I think that this one is quite different, so I would recommend this one. Wish Upon a Dark Star is a short story collection by Richard Clive from the Fear House, and this is also available on Kindle Unlimited, and I have to tell you, it's excellent. So I wrote a rave review of Richard Clive's first short story collection, Strange Frequencies. I thought that was his debut book release, and I thought it was unfair that a debut collection could be that good. That the standard, it's not just Richard's ideas and his stories and everything, it's his actual writing. Like, you know, when you read an author and you just think, oh, they've got it, they've nailed it, they've got it. Like, he has it, whatever it is, in terms of like what I think people need to be successful authors. And this collection did not let me down. It felt dark and cold. It wasn't you know, themed specifically, I don't think. Like Strange Frequencies felt like it was more themed. We have stories about ghostly apparitions, experiments, there's a bit of crime in there, there's an apocalyptic story, so there's a really big mix. I will say I didn't absolutely love every story. My least favourite genre in the world is crime. I'm just not interested in it, and there was a crime story in here that I personally could have done without, even though again Richard's writing is really good. It's just I'm leaning more into that I hate crime stories, so it's not really Richard's fault. But for me, I would have preferred that it was all just sort of balled out horror, but for less close-minded readers I don't think that would be a problem. But yeah, I 100% would recommend this short story collection. It's really good. Oh, there's a really scary story that set off my arachnophobia, just remembered that. Number 5, an anthology again, Darkness Beckons, published by Flame Tree, and this was edited by Mark Morris. Now, if you saw any of my videos at the end of last year, you will know that I was raving and raving and raving about Elemental Forces, which was a different Flame Tree Press anthology edited by Mark Morris. It contained my favourite story of the entire year, I Miss You Too Much by Sarah Langan. That's so good. And so Mark is writing a series of anthologies for Flame Tree, and they're not like themed as such, but the titles each start with a different letter of the alphabet. So he's up to E and working on F right now, and Darkness Beckons is obviously the 4th one, being the D one. Please don't twist that into any sort of real. The D. Anyway, this contains authors such as, but not limited to, Stephen Volk, Brian Evanson, Ali Wilkes, Helen Marshall, Eric LaRocca, and this anthology will give you monsters, ghosts, witches, psychological horror. It's kind of got it all, and every story in it is strong. Every story in it is enjoyable. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, and I would totally recommend it to horror readers. I think it's amazing. I honestly think that Mark Morris is, if not the best, definitely one of the best editors working in horror at the moment. His editing style and the stories that he gets together, the authors he invites in, it's just top notch. 6. I'm nervous about saying this because I'm going to mispronounce the author's name, and I am so sorry. I googled how to say it and I can't. It's Unquiet Waters by Thana or Tana. I think it's Thana Nouveau, or I'm so sorry. And it's part of the Black Shuck Books Shadows collection, and it's number 3 in the collection. So I had this on my shelf for such a long time because I collect the Shadows books and I sort of like dip in and out, grab them. But they're all, you know, all books that you could read in a day if you've got like a couple of hours spare, generally. And this is a water themed one. And I think, oh my gosh, I think this is one of my favourites Shadows books so far, easily. And I've really liked all of them, but this one was, oh my gosh, it was so, I can't believe that I haven't been reading this writer for longer. Unbelievable. So it's we have a story about a woman who's obsessed with the water, the seaside, and her brother starts to get really worried about her, and it gets big. Like, you think you're in kind of one person small little world, but then it gets really big. Then we've got, oh god, a really creepy story about a guy who looks at his reflection and then feels like he's being followed. It was so creepy. Then we've got a story about 2 sisters that go shark diving, and one of them is kind of a pro, one of them is a complete noob. And this one reminded me of 47 meters down without the silliness and with a lot more atmosphere and a kind of supernatural slant, and it was so good. And then the last story is about I can't really tell you anything about it without spoiling it, but water themed again. And I have to tell you that, like, the consistent quality of all of these stories and the weirdness of them, like where the horror's coming from, there's only one, maybe the last one, that is more like a story you'd expect to read. I don't know if I'm explaining this very well, but all of the others are so weird you'd never predict them, if that makes sense. Whereas the last story, I feel, could fit into a themed anthology of the kind of story that it is quite nicely. But the other 3 were extremely unique. So I absolutely loved it. Yeah, would definitely recommend it to horror fans, especially if you like sort of water themed horrors. Then we have another collection. We do have novels in this list, by the way. Then I've got For Those Who Dream Monsters by Anna Taborska from Mortberry Press. Oh my gosh, the cover of this book. Look at how beautiful. Just have to mention that I love this book cover. I'm obsessed. Available on KU if you want to dip in and check it out. So, this collection, we've got wolves, werewolves, demons, serial killers, and generally it is extremely savage and dark. That's how I would describe this collection. Really, really savage and dark. I will warn people that several of the stories, there's upsetting stuff to do with animals. Anna Taborska, like Penny Jones, is a straight up savage, and I mean it as a compliment, not afraid to, you know, cross lines with certain taboos and things. This was kind of like a mixed bag for me again. So I really enjoyed, like, the stories that I enjoyed, I was obsessed with, and then there were a few that I like could have left them, to be honest. But there was one story, it was like a story within a story that I'm still thinking about, and it would make such a great episode of something. There were wolves in that one, and I just couldn't believe, like, so savage. But I very rarely see, this is the thing about Anna Taborska's writing that I really like. So there is still a bit of a stigma around women in horror right now, and I've spoken to people recently, unfortunately, that have said things to me like they actively avoid picking up horror books written by women because they assume that they're all going to be a certain type of horror or themes or something. And I have to tell you that the most savage, jarring stories that I've read that are like straight up balls out horror in the last couple of years have all been written by women. So I feel like, yeah, if you're looking for somebody who's like not afraid to upset you, this is probably a collection that you would like. Number 8, Dark Worlds We Wander by Kristen Kirby, published by Unnerving, and this is a collection. I think this is Kristen's debut collection, and she's had stories published in anthologies and things. This was a really, really fun collection, and I really enjoyed it. It contained one of my favourite stories of last year, Meat, which she had published in an anthology. That's a sort of apocalyptic story about food sources. There was a really great story in here where there's something in the dryer, like an old school Stephen King monster story. That felt like right out of Skeleton Crew or something to me. I loved it. Yeah. Oh, there's a great story. I'm awful with titles once I very rarely remember titles of short stories, so I apologize for that. There's one about a curious fly. I really enjoyed that. We've got Apocalypse, we've got Other Worlds, we've got she's really good with landscape, I realised after reading more of getting to read more of Kristen's work all collected here. Yeah, really good with landscapes and setting scenes and things. So yeah, I'd recommend this one as well, really good. Okay, a novel next, and I feel really bad because this one wasn't my cup of tea, and for the life of me I can't figure out why. It is Incarnate, or Incarnate by Richard Thomas from Podium Publishing, and it's this book. I should have loved this because everything about the synopsis, it's really up my street. So it's about this guy called Sebastian that's a sin eater, and it's so weird. The concept was so cool. So when people die, he eats, absorbs the hang on, let me check my notes so I don't misrepresent this. Yeah, he kind of eats their transgressions or their sins or whatever, so that they can cross over to the afterlife peacefully, sort of absolve them of their bad deeds or whatever. And I loved the concept and just the idea of this guy with this ability. So he's kind of revered by his fellow townfolk and whatnot, and every time he does this ritual it takes something out of him. So this isn't, it's a very selfless act. I mean, selfless, he gets paid for it, but it's still a selfless act in that the benefit to the people he's doing this for is way greater than it is for him. And I was quite worried about what it was actually doing to him. And there are other things going on and stuff. Obviously, it's a novel. I thought that the writing was really good. I really liked the premise. I was really on board with the character. I think where I was losing interest a little bit is that it jumps around a little bit, not in a incohesive way, but I just didn't like it because I was very hooked into this central character, and I didn't want to move away from him at any point really. And I just found when we moved elsewhere, I was a bit can we get back? So I think that's what didn't work for me. But I am really in a minority for this, because if you look at the reviews online, they're glowing 5 stars. Everybody loves this book, especially people who like this type of horror, like I do, this kind of dark supernatural, spiritual kind of stuff, and it feels very folky as well. So yeah, I guess it's just personal gripes for me, but people, for me personally, I guess overall I wouldn't read it a second time, but I find it hard to not recommend to people because I don't really know what my problem was. Everyone everyone else loves it. And I'm not talking just like 20 reviews of like family and friends of Richard's have clearly written nice reviews or anything. Like there are loads of reviews, and everybody, like other book reviewers that I am friends with, that I speak to, everybody loves this book. So I feel a bit like left out of the gang on it. Also the cover is really cool. Okay, numbers 10, 11 and 12. I read a trilogy by Jasper Bark called Draw You In, and these are all available on KU. Also, yeah, if I didn't say, Incarnate is also available on KU if you want to dip in and check it out. So these books by Jasper Bark, we've got Draw You In, collector's item, and then number 2 is Secret Origins, number 3 is Behind the Mask, and it took me so long to notice that the covers are genius. Anyway, this is about Linda, an artist, she works in comic book artistry, and her career is sort of lagging a bit. She was more successful at one point and well known. She had a good relationship with this comic book editor of some really big comics, and she was sort of like really well known in the industry. And now she's kind of on the convention circuit, and she's not getting as much work. The industry has changed, the way she gets paid has changed, like expectations of her and her role have changed, and it's all a little bit harder. And she's, you know, fighting bitterness about that and worrying about her future, like maybe she should move into something else or whatever. And then she bumps into this editor at a convention, and she's just doodling away as she's speaking with him. And then he invites her to an exclusive event for the next day, and then when she goes, not only is she not on the list, but he's not on the list. And then when she asks mutual friends and colleagues about him, no one knows who she's talking about. It's like the guy doesn't exist. And then it begins this sort of like mystery, this kind of like caper, if you will, of her trying to figure out if she's being punked in the ultimate punk of all time, or if something very weird's going on. And then she, you know, pairs up with this guy that works for the police, and da-da-da-da. So these books are crazy. They are so eccentric. Like, the initial premise, I was super hooked, like really, really, really hooked. And I just thought that's so interesting. And I was just dying to know, you know, what happened to this guy and why did he go away? Like, where did he go, and why does no one remember him? Because we're in Linda's POV, like, I believed that this guy existed in the first place and that Linda hadn't just imagined him or something. So I was fully with Linda the whole way. The only thing I would say negative, like a negative for me, is that this is a trilogy, and I think it seems like Jasper set this all up as a trilogy because the books do, like, they're very cohesive as a trilogy goes. Like, they don't seem like thrown together. It doesn't seem like, oh, I finished one book, I'll just write a sequel. Like, it seems like they were planned this way, and for that reason there is an element of the story that I really like. I felt like I needed it to be wrapped up in book 1, and it wasn't. It was left for the trilogy, and I, as a general rule, I hate it when books do that, because I'm all for a series, but like, if you have a central question and plot, I feel like it should be tied up at least partially, like in the first story, rather than leaving it open for like the entire story in the series, if that makes sense. However, they're really, really enjoyable books, and so weird. I really enjoy Jasper's writing style as well. I haven't read a lot of Jasper Bark before. I've been really aware of Jasper for years though, and I think that people know him as nobody dislikes him, by the way. Everyone that I know that knows Jasper loves him, and I think he's known for being just like beautifully eccentric, and it comes through in his work. It was a lot of fun, this trilogy, and I would recommend it. Very, very light on the horror, I will say. Not the normal kind of books that I would review on my channel, but yeah, for sure horror elements, like people just disappearing off the face of the planet and then feeling isolated, like everyone thinks you're a lunatic. Pretty, you know, that's horror to me. But I really, enjoyed them. Anyway, number 13, The Protos Experiment by Simon Clarke. available on KU, and it published by Darkness Visible Publishing. So this is Simon's newest book, and also it's not available to the public yet, and I haven't seen it, but he also wrote a screenplay and it actually got produced, so there is a film of this, and it's making the circuit, the film festival circuit at the moment, making the rounds, so hopefully it'll be available for public consumption soon. I'm really excited about it. Now, this is not the normal kind of book I would enjoy because it's sci-fi horror, and again, like, that's not really my bag. However, it really felt like a Dark Mirror episode, and I really love Dark Mirror, and I love the way that Dark Mirror plays with sci-fi. I don't know what kind of sci-fi I don't like. I don't even know my own tastes. So it begins with this guy waking up with no memory of like how he got to where he is, and he seems to be in some sort of like indoor area, and he finds that he is chained by quite a long chain to a really big sort of beefy guy, and he doesn't have a pyramid head, but I was picturing Pyramid Head from Silent Hill, but just with sort of a regular face, like kind of size. And this guy is sort of like, whenever he hears noise, the big guy is just going and murdering the person who made whatever noise it was, and this poor guy is just being dragged around with him, and the beastie man doesn't seem like aware of the guy that's chained to him at all. And then it gets even weirder from there, if you can believe. And the concept of this, I just spoke with Simon Clarke today, is that this is a sort of trial experiment that's being done on criminals who are imprisoned, and it's in return for you know, some benefit to the prisoner. But they're playing around with memory, and it's sort of like a rehabilitation, sort of having a look at the way we do crime and punishment kind of stuff. And it just opened up so many questions for me, because the further into the book you go, the more you realize you don't know about what's going on, but not in a annoying way, just in a really, oh wow, I didn't expect another mystery to open up there kind of way. You realize that you really don't know the characters, you don't know what's going on, you can't predict anything, but it is all set up really well. So this one was just a really fun wild ride. Not the kind of book I would normally pick up at all, but I'm a fan of Simon Clarke, and it's like the same with Stephen King. Like, Stephen King, I don't like crime, but if Stephen King brings out a crime novel, I'm going to read it because it's Stephen King. And so I picked this up because I was at the book launch at FantasyCon when Simon Clarke released it, and I'm really glad I read it. It was also, as well as all of the sort of existential questions and the the thought-provoking content, it is just classic good fun Simon Clarke as well. 14, I talked about this earlier this month. At Dark I Become Loathsome by Eric LaRocca, which is a novel published by Titan in the UK, and it's out on the 28th, so in about a week, or just under a week. And I loved it. It's extreme horror, but not, baby in a blender type extreme horror. It's more akin to the work of like Poppy Seabright or Eric LaRocca. Like, I think Eric LaRocca is pretty firmly established himself for the kind of horror that he writes now. Very dark, brooding, quite explicit at times. It's upsetting, it's deep, it's thought-provoking, but also the way that Eric writes, it's very beautiful. It's about a guy who he lost his wife, and around the same time, not long after, his child was kidnapped, and that they still don't know where the kid is. So he's basically grieving two losses, and I don't even know which one is. I don't know. Is it worse to lose someone to death, or worse to lose someone and not know where they are, especially a child? It's so heartbreaking. And and the way that he's dealing with this is that he does this for work. This is his job. He finds people, or people find him, people who are really depressed, who are kind of suffering with sort of suicidal ideation, and he does sort of like a faux death kind of ritual with them. And the idea is that once they've actually faced the reality of if they were going to die themselves, it gives them kind of a new lease on life, and it's quite effective as like a therapy, as kind of an intervention kind of thing. And then he meets a particular client who's different, and can't tell you any more about it without spoiling it, but I really loved it. It was so Moorish. It was I wouldn't recommend this to everyone, because this is definitely not a book for everyone. If you're the kind of person who prefers to read like supernatural horror, stuff that can take you out of the real world and you can panic about completely fictional circumstances, or if you like your horror on the lighter side, this isn't a book for you. But if you want to explore grief and sort of like the grimier side of human nature, this is a perfect book for that. 15, a collection, also from the Black Shadows collection, number 6 in the collection. It is Broken on the Inside by Phil Sloman. I love Phil Sloman's short stories. It was great. So we got a story about a girl who has a sort of AI implant, and it's like a health thing, so like it'll tell her, you know, she's dehydrated. If there's anything wrong, it will alert her, it'll know immediately and alert her. And it seems like a really good idea, because she's been suffering with something for ages and she just hasn't been able to get a diagnosis, so this thing will like be able to tell her. But then it starts to cause problems, and it went in such an unexpected direction. I loved the idea. Again, it felt like a Black Mirror episode, this one. I loved it. Oh my god, again, I wish I could remember the titles. There's another one about a girl who, whenever she's eating, the food she's about to consume is calling her a murderer, and it was so funny. It was such a good idea. I wish I'd thought of it. And then it goes dark, and I just thought that I was reading a funny little comedy horror about mildly sentient food that only this one girl could hear, and then as it turned out, it was not quite what I thought, but it was really good. Oh god, there's the story about that guy. Can't tell you anything about that, I'll spoil it. Oh god, there's another story about a guy who ingests a fly, and then he gets so paranoid about the fly making him sick. And that was, I've had a little bit of medical paranoia myself in the past, and so I related. Like, this guy is not very likable, the character, but it doesn't matter, because the thing he's going through is like, even if you're, you know, if you haven't ingested a fly yourself, I unfortunately have, that's a story for a different day, yeah, you can sort of like relate to the panic he starts going through. Yeah, and then it ends off with this crazy sci-fi story, which again felt like Black Mirror. A lot of Black Mirror style stuff, I think, in this particular collection. I thought it was really strong. Again, a brilliant installment in the Black Shadows collection, and I would definitely recommend it if you enjoy short horror stories. It's really like just brilliant, just brilliant all round. I then read a novella from Phil Sloman again called Becoming David. This is independently published, and dare I say, less extreme, but shades of Eric LaRocca and Poppy C. Bright, I have to say. So this, oh god, how do I even begin to explain this one? It's about a serial killer with a particular diet, and one day someone he thinks he's killed, or someone he has killed, doesn't quite go away, and that's where the course of his life changes. And so annoying, because it's a novella. I feel like I should be able to tell you more about it than that, but everything was a revelation, and I really don't want to spoil anything. But this was shocking at times, violent. It made me sad. I was really like, it's a horror story, so I knew, and I've read Phil's work, so I knew it wasn't going to suddenly go bright and sunny at any point, and I was just always so worried about any character that came into contact with the protagonist. Also, yeah, when the one murdered person doesn't quite go away, I wasn't sure if this was a supernatural thread or if it was a mental health thing. You know, like a guilt, like a sort of cricket on the shoulder kind of thing going on. It is explained, so you will have an answer on that when you read it, but I really enjoyed the sort of ambiguity of that element of it for a while. And yeah, just a really well written story. It ran its natural course. I think Phil didn't seem to try and force it to go anywhere that didn't feel natural. It went the only way it could go. And yeah, it was really strong novella, and I would recommend it to fans of slasher stories, I guess. People who like slasher stories, people who like, I think the people who enjoy true crime also might like this as well. It's a very particular kind of story. 17. We're almost there, guys. Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, but from Fourth Estate Publishing. I have to say, I wish I loved it, but I didn't love it. I have wanted to read Jeff Vandermeer, like more Jeff Vandermeer, for such a long time, and I saw the Netflix film of Annihilation, which is based on the book, and then I realized I had that book here, so I read it, and I didn't like the ending of the film. I thought it just went too speculative for me. It felt a little bit like they forced it to get crazy where okay, it didn't really need to. Thankfully the book doesn't quite go that nuts, but unfortunately I just couldn't connect to the protagonist. I thought that the Area X, well, oh, so for anyone who's not familiar, sorry, Annihilation is about a team of people that go into a place called Area X, which is sort of, it's like a place in the world where something happens, and I can't remember, maybe like in the film it was a meteorite, but I can't remember what it was. But in any case, it's a picture like a wall or like a dome or something where this area has been sort of like infected by something, and so the landscape has changed, and people who go into Area X are not guaranteed to come out or anything like that. They've sent several teams in, so there are notes and stations set up, and we're following the 12th expedition of people who are going in, all women, which I actually really liked that, because I don't know, whenever there's a team of all men, it doesn't even occur to anybody to question that, but a team of all women was noticeable to me, but I liked that had been done, and I think that the reason was that they're always sending men in, so they thought they tried between women or something, I don't know, but we've got, you know, sort of an ex-army academic, we've got a surveyor, anthropologist, and so they've all got different roles, and they're just there to take samples, make observations, feedback, figure out what's going on, and it's all sort of like weird and wonderful in there. But the problem for me was we're in completely unfamiliar terrain. There's weird stuff going on in there, and I really liked the mystery of the place and everything, but I could not connect to the protagonist at all. Like she felt devoid of personality, and I think that maybe that was the point. Maybe she was supposed to be a little bit blank and jaded by her experiences or something, but I just didn't care what happened to her, and because of that I started to get a bit bored, because I just thought I don't care what happens to this character, and I no longer care what happens to the rest of the world either. So I did read it to the end, but I'm not going to be picking up I think there are 3 books in this series about Area X, and I'm not going to read any more. And the last one by Simon Clarke again. This is available on KU. This is Blood Crazy from Darkness Visible Publishing. So this is a reread. I read this years ago. I think it first came out in like 1994, 1995. And this is an apocalyptic story where a very particular part of the population loses their minds and go all murderous, only towards a particular part of the population. And I don't want to say where it is because it's so much fun in the opening scenes of the book to find that out and wonder what frick is going on. But it's Blood Crazy is probably one of Simon's like most popular and famous books. People really love it, and it is a lot of fun because the host of characters you have are quite unexpected, and I love apocalyptic stories, and I've never seen one where the cause is what it is here and where the enemy is what it is here. And even though I'm not like, it's not like loads of the population die kind of apocalyptic, but this is a world ender or a world changer story for sure. It's a series, there are a couple of books in it, but I'm going to be reading those. So I'd read this original one, I hadn't read 2 and 3, but I am currently reading number 2, so I really enjoyed it. It was just nuts. It was again good old-fashioned balls out horror, and I really enjoyed it. I would recommend it to people who enjoy apocalyptic fiction. I need a cup of tea. 1, 2, Barry's coming for you. I'm Barry, coming for you if you don't subscribe. So that's my update, and I'm going to update you again with fewer books next time so that I'm not sat here for this long getting a dry throat. I hope that you enjoyed some of this bookish content, and I will see you tomorrow with a gaming video, and then on Saturday with something bookish, and then on Sunday with an author interview. Bleat!